What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Marriage Puzzle Podcast. My name's Thomas.
I'm Julie.
And today, this episode, we're still in our 15 Lessons After 15 Years of Marriage series. And it's been a great series so far, at least we think so. We're having a lot of fun talking about it, so we hope you guys are enjoying it. But this episode, we're talking about honor and honesty. In fact, the title of the episode is Be Honoring and Honest. So there you go. That's where I got that from. So
Lesson number 5.
Lesson 5. Good. I didn't remember which lesson we were in, but I knew the name of it. So this is going to be a fun little episode here. Be honoring and honest. So, we're kicking off this episode by just talking about the definitions. The definition of honor. The definition of honor is simple, just a couple words: to have high respect. And so we looked at that and we're like, well, that's not very helpful in terms of creating content. So we decided to look up the definition of respect as well. And that gives a little bit more meat to it. And it's a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. So you see this a lot, respect kind of portrayed a lot in the workplace and, the military, things like that, based on their abilities, qualities, or achievements. But it works in a marriage too. And so in this scenario, it would probably be more so based off of qualities of the other person. Hopefully you're not marrying someone just because of their achievements. That's a little bit shallow. But hopefully it's more about their qualities. So that's kind of where we're at. So you can never go wrong with honoring your spouse, but where do you start with that? We've got some points that we're going to talk about and kind of give you some tips on how to do that. We've also got a personal story that we're going to share from our lives towards the end of the podcast, so make sure you stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I mean, real simple, because in the lesson, be honoring and honest, I mean, there's your takeaway. Just be honoring and honest.
Yeah.
But if you're like, well, how do I do that? Where
Right.
do I start? And so we did a sandwich technique here of 3 do's and a don't, but or not 3 do's,
2 do's
and 1 don't to make 3 points. So the first one is do respect them. We just said that honoring is respect. So when you respect someone, you see them in a different light. It is just high honor.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways you can respect your spouse is watching your tone of voice and how you speak to them and how you react to something that they have to say and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, an example of that from us. This isn't the story we were telling about. This is just a simple sidebar. But, an example for us is I'm pretty forgetful, especially when it comes to scheduling things. And so I probably ask you 50 times a week, what are we doing tomorrow? Or what are we doing tonight? Or, whatever, what's the plan?
Yes.
And so, yeah, true story. The fact that I'm forgetful doesn't give you the right to be disrespectful when I ask those questions. That's it may be frustrating to you. I'm sure that it is. But if I come to you and I say that and you just, moan and groan before you answer me, that's just going to start a fight. So, instead, another way to, respond like, instead of, just look at the calendar. Like, why do you not remember this? You could probably, I'm not coaching Julie in this. It may sound like I'm coaching her, but, we're just.
He's looking right at me.
I'm just looking right at, but, instead, a simple reaction could be, would you mind checking the calendar before you ask me that question? Because I always put everything on the calendar. So, if you would just check that first, that would be really helpful for me. That's a very respectful way to ask. And, that can go either direction. I mean, I'm sure there's one more forgetful spouse in any marriage, and that just happens to be me and ours.
Yeah, it is very tempting to be rude and not.
And probably easier.
Yeah, like, stop. Like, we have young kids, so I see that all the time with the sibling relationship of, how they respond to each other, and you're constantly correcting their attitude and tone and things like that. So it is easier to be rude, or that's kind of our sinful nature go-to response. But when talking about honor, I want to honor you. I want to respect you as my husband, because it's a privilege that you actually love me, and the things that, I forget, or the things that I do wrong, and I don't want you to respond to me and my weakness. And so with that one example, yeah, it's a daily choice I have to make, but I choose to honor you and respect you. And that's just like an easy way of, kind of just how we respond to people. And in an earlier episode, I remember saying that, we can be nicer to our acquaintances than our spouses, how we respond to someone that we just met, we're standing in line next to, or even our coworkers. I mean, how often in that example, does your boss ask you, did you do this, or what am I doing, or what are I doing now? And you just have to kind of like go with it, because I would think, honor and respect them because of their position, or they're paying you.
Right.
But why would I then choose to be disrespectful and rude to the person that I love the most above anyone else, even when they kind of do those similar things that could irk me?
You said that we talked about that in a previous episode, and that sounds like a good episode. I actually don't remember that. That's if I did, we could plug the actual episode. But you guys will just have to go back and listen to all of our episodes to find out how good that one was.
I just remember that.
But
so that's number one.
Right. Yeah. That's part of it. I mean, another thing that you can do is just the way that you treat them. Around other people. You have to, if you guys are together and, someone says something, you're not gonna, just, you shouldn't, like berate them in front of everyone and, get them in trouble, with air quotes, in front of everyone. You should save some of those conversations to be private, or you should save all those conversations to be private, when you leave the event and get in the car, like, hey, this, I didn't appreciate this when you said that, or, when you did this, or, whatever. That's being respectful to them. That's showing that you have your spouse's back no matter what they say or do. And then, but still being honest with them, which we're going to talk about in a minute, behind closed doors. Yeah. This is how I felt, so I think that's the other part of being respectful.
Yeah. You want to make them, you don't want to make them look bad, I think is what you're saying. And that's at home, or, in public settings. That kind of leads to number two. So if the first one's do respect them, the second one for the sandwich technique is negative, and it's don't. So don't talk bad about your spouse in any setting. So that would be public. You usually hear that, like, don't talk bad about your spouse behind their back. It's like, well, we see it as like public, whether they're there or private without them. So
or whether it's with one other person, like a friend of yours. Like if I go out for a guys' night, I'm not going to talk about it to a group of people. If I'm having lunch with a coworker, I'm not going to talk about it with that one person. I'm not going to talk bad about you to anyone, whether it's a group setting or an individual one-on-one, confiding in someone. Those aren't the people that need to be hearing those conversations. It's your spouse.
Right.
You need to be talking to your spouse to fix those issues, if any are there, rather than gossiping, so to speak, behind their back when they're not there to defend themselves or help solve the problem.
Absolutely. We're all for marriage coaching and advice. If that's kind of how you enter into the conversation, and, your spouse should be aware that you're talking about them or that to this other person for help, for advice or coaching in areas of growth. But anyone who is friends with me is probably still friends with me because they know where I stand on this, because I cannot stand the girl nights. I've been there and done that, navigated some friendships that, are kind of shoulders length apart now from me because I cannot stand the guy bashing. You know, girls just go out and their husbands can't do anything right, and that's just what they talk about. And I'm just like, you know, like, well, my husband's perfect, you know. No, but it's because Thomas and I have chosen to honor and respect each other, talk to the right person about those things, and not air out all the dirty laundry and settings that aren't appropriate.
Right. And while that type of scenario likely does happen more in groups of girlfriends than guy friends, it's still not appropriate for guys to bring up in any setting. You know, I mean, you know, even just, you know, going over to a group of friends' house and like, my wife made me help with the laundry before I had to leave, you know, like that. The scene from The Sandlot where, you know, Smalls is going to the tree house with everybody, and he says, my mom made me put on my jacket and do the dishes before I left. Like, you don't want to, you know, you don't want to talk bad about your spouse in that light either. You know, a whole different way to phrase something like that would be like, oh no, I just helped with the dishes before I came over, that's why I was late. You know, like, don't put it on your spouse. That's unnecessary. Just you know, you don't want to do that in a group of friends, whether you're a guy or a girl. I mean, it's just not appropriate.
Yeah. And another perspective, because we are parents, like something that we're just really mindful of, that we encourage people to be as well, is remember that your kids are always watching.
Always watching.
Whether you even see it or not, and what they hear is amazing. And so really, you're talking about their mom or dad when you're talking poorly about your spouse. And so they're stuck with, you know, if you are a parent, you're going to be their mom or their dad for the rest of their life, no matter what happens in your marriage. Like, that's a whole nother topic for another day of the, you know, relationship with your sons or daughters, but as a mom or a dad. And so yeah, if that's perspective, like, why would you talk bad about their dad or their mom or someone that, you know, that they should have high honor and respect for?
Even, sorry, I just want to jump in on this. We both come from backgrounds of parents who were divorced, and you know, we've never been divorced, but I don't think I'm speaking out of turn in this. Even if you're divorced from their parent, I don't think it's appropriate to talk bad about their mom or dad. You know, that's just not necessary. You don't have to like them, you know, if you're divorced, but you don't need to talk bad to your child about them.
Well, like I said, because then that, you know, my dad's still my dad, my mom's still my mom, even though they haven't been married for decades, been married together. So I still have to have that relationship. And so I don't need to hear things. And that's where, you know, what I'm very mindful of.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but no, I think that was an important thing to discuss. Even though that's not our expertise from, you know, marriage, we come from those backgrounds, and, you know, I just think that's not appropriate. So
yeah, hopefully we're
married or not
hitting that point for you. But also, I mean, I think in that light, you're also demonstrating everything you do in your marriage is setting the foundation. Like, you're building the foundation of what your kids see what their marriage should be. So if you're putting down your spouse, even at home, and you think that, you know, you're talking on the phone with someone complaining about your spouse, and, you know, your child hears that, that's actually then setting the expectation that it's okay for them to do that to their spouse. And on the other side of that, thinking about that when my kids are older, like, I wouldn't want them to do that. So why would I be modeling that to them?
You wouldn't want them to do that, and you also wouldn't want that to be done to them. Like,
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, if a guy is going to marry my daughter and is acting that way, he and I are going to have a talk. And so, you know, you don't want that. You don't want your kids to be portraying that because that's what you've demonstrated, but you also you want the best for your kids. You wouldn't want something like that happening to them and them to be treated that way either. So you're the number one model in your kids' lives. So you have to model this as hard as it can be sometimes. As many times as I ask you what's on the schedule for tomorrow, we still have to model that to make sure that our kids know how they should treat their spouse in the future and how they should be treated by their spouse in the future, because we don't know how their spouse is going to be raised. So we have to do our part to make sure they know both sides of that equation.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully that's good stuff. And of course, on the topic of, being honoring and honesty, then the third would be to be honest.
Use honesty.
Use honesty. And so honesty, use integrity, use transparency. You can use a lot of different words for honesty, and sometimes people say not everything that's true needs to be said, but everything that's said needs to be true. And I think that that's, a good definition of what to do, in a marriage context, because if I was brutally honest to you, I don't think...
Oh boy, you guys get ready. It's about to get good.
You might tend to be honest about the poor qualities,
right,
the bad things that you do. But I'm being honest. Like you said, be honest to your spouse. But, everything true may not need to be said.
Yeah, there's a fine line between nagging and expressing your feelings. Right? You can nag the person to death and say, pick up your laundry off the floor and put it in the hamper. Do this, do that, like nagging, versus, hey, you know what? It really makes me feel disrespected when you just leave this here, because then it makes me feel like I have to be your servant and pick up after you. Like, that's a whole different explanation in that regard. So you're right. Saying everything that's true can turn into nagging if you're not careful, if you don't approach it with the right heart and attitude. But transparency is necessary. So you can't just bottle up those feelings. The nagging thoughts, tuck those away until you're in the right mind and attitude to approach them and have an honest conversation. Very different ends of the spectrum there.
Well, I think that goes back to the example you were saying about correcting them in public. You want to be respectful and not point out some flaws and embarrass them in public. But if you were in the car on the way home, you might be like, hey, you're calm, and hey, when you said this, it might have come across wrong. You might want to check yourself.
Right. And
hopefully in a marriage, like, you have that trust and open relationship with each other, that person should make you a better person. So, that's another topic of humility and accepting that. But I think, if someone is trying to, your husband or wife's trying to be honest with you in that loving, just kind of like advice, then you should be open to that, because you should want to be a better person being in that relationship than if you were alone and you didn't have someone to be honest to you.
For sure. And I mean, all of these things, do respect them. Don't talk bad about your spouse in any setting. Do use honesty. Those are all things that will help you build a foundation of honor and honesty, so that when potentially big things come up, you can react appropriately. And that's kind of what our story goes into tonight is, the foundation that we had helped us in a situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going through these lessons because we've been married for 15 years. And some of these aren't huge concepts that you might not have, I've never thought of that, or I've never heard of that before. But like Thomas just said, we've been working on these lessons. So whether we learned them the hard way and we want to give you the advice, or just things that kind of subconsciously that we just committed to. And this was one of them, like along the way of being open, honest, respectful, honoring, all of that. And so that actually showed that it was a strong foundation in our marriage a couple years ago, when I was actually accused of having an inappropriate relationship with someone else. So it was a false accusation, but this person approached me and accused me of that. And I was kind of blindsided, but it was like, okay. Because they try to use it as like a blackmail, situation. And So blindsided me with the conversation, accused me.
And obviously you defended yourself, you know, to them, because that's what you would do.
I tried, but it was more of a, you know, they wanted to prove something more. And so they wanted to get Thomas involved. So, you know, like, well, I'm going to go tell Thomas. And instead of me just like, okay, sheepishly, you know, or even trying to call him to tip him off of like what was happening, I just tried to have, you know, the best integrity and
transparency.
In that situation of, it was such a weird situation, but I was like, okay, if that's what you think, then, and then that's what you want to do is go to my husband with that, then let's call him right now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do that. Speaker, like we're both, you know, talk to him. And so we did make that call.
Yeah. And you know, I got looped in on the situation, and, you know, honestly, I don't remember exactly who said what, you know, and what, you know, who told the story or whatever, but I remember my reaction very vividly. And my reaction was, I looked, I said to Julie, I said, did anything happen? And you said,
no.
And I said, okay, we're good. Yeah. Like, that was it. There was nothing else that needed to be said. That other person didn't have the right to continue to try to drive a wedge between my marriage. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't additional conversations that happened in private.
Absolutely.
But in all honesty, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, after that conversation, I don't remember ever questioning you on it again. You gave me your response, and I knew that was the answer. Like, I didn't have to go back and be like, well, so is that really the answer? You know, is that true? It wasn't a, you know, back your spouse up in public and then, you know, not back them up in private kind of thing. It was just, I knew what the answer was. I didn't have anything else. I'm sure we continued to work through it because of the situation. I mean, it was obviously a tough scenario, but, you know, I had gotten to a crossroads at that point. When I was told, I came to a crossroads, and I could have exploded and reacted and said, what, are you kidding me? How could you do this? And come across, like, jump on the accuser side. Or I could have taken my spouse's side and said, did anything happen? No? Okay. We're good. That's exactly how it went down. And now I understand, like, you could be in a marriage where you may not trust your spouse to that point yet. That we understand that. We're not saying that if this situation came up for you and you don't feel like you're there, that may not be the response that you have. That just may be okay, well, we'll have to talk about this later, or something like that. You know, you can still be respectful in the moment and not snap back at them. But, you know, these other things that we're talking about over time will help you to build a foundation where if something like that arises, you know your spouse's heart, you know that that's not even in their mind, and that, you know, you can just ask them point blank, and then whatever their answer is, you know it's true because they've been honest with you so much and you've been honest with them so much. So we understand that you may not every marriage is going to be at that point yet, but use these things as a foundation, as tools to build a foundation to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly didn't know how you were going to respond, even though I just knew, like, the right thing to do was to loop you in right away, quickly, and it not ever show that I did have something to hide or that there could be too much time, you know, passing. It was like, no, let's get us all, you know, on the same page here quickly before this goes any further. But I didn't know. I was, you know, a little scared of doing that.
Which is totally fair because
I didn't know how you were going to respond. Yeah.
It's a tricky situation to be put in.
But how you responded was very honoring to me. And then therefore that was a very defining moment in our marriage. And that's why, you know, this is the first time I'm sharing that story publicly. But that's why I wanted to share it, because as we prepared for this lesson in this episode, it was like, there wasn't this huge pivotal moment of learning, like, I was not honoring and now I'm going to honor my spouse, or I wasn't honest and now I'm going to learn to be honest. It was just such a foundation that then when, you know, the fire got hot and that awkward setting, it proved that it was a solid honoring and honest relationship, that we had that high trust in each other, open communication, and it's something that then, we want to encourage others in as well.
Well, and one last thought on this from my perspective is that conversation happened, and then I didn't continue to hold it against you. I didn't use that later. I didn't bring that up in a fight. Like, well, if you're doing this, were you truthful about that? Like, it never came back up again. It was done, over with, out, like I said, that person, that situation didn't have the right to drive a wedge between our marriage. And so from that regard, like, you had been honest with me. Why was there any reason to ever bring that back up? So I then didn't use it as leverage against you later on. So I think that's just respect back to you, just kind of hitting the tennis ball back to you in that regard, that it was just like, well, you were honest with me, so I'll just drop it. Like, it's all, like, nothing ever happened, so it's all good. So yeah, I mean, make sure that you respect your spouse. Don't talk bad about your spouse in any setting, and do use honesty with your spouse. And just, one last final thought to close out this episode with, marriage is a privilege. It's an honor to have your spouse in your life, and to have them love you. Honoring is natural when you understand a marriage is a privilege. And the fact that they choose to stay with you and love you every day is important to know. That you don't have to be here tomorrow. I mean, our wedding vows say you do, and the Bible says you do, and from our faith that's where we are. But bottom line is, from a legal perspective, it's still a choice. And so by treating you with honor and respect, I know that there's no reason for you to go look for anything else, and that gives you a reason to feel safe and stay. I think that's as important for all of you guys to hear too.
Yeah, I think that's why I was saying earlier about the parent-child relationship, because that is actually more lifelong than a marriage, or it could be. And that's where, marriage is more of a choice. And so, but absolutely, like you said, if you see marriage through the lens of it being a privilege as a choice, then honoring and honesty should come a lot more natural and easy.
Right. It's a privilege to have someone stay married to you. That's the perspective. Like, from my perspective, it's a privilege that I have that you're still married to me. And so, when you have the choice to go one way or another. And so, think of it every day as a privilege, and you want to keep that privilege and treat your marriage that way. So
thanks for hanging out with us again. It's been so fun to continue the 15 lessons after 15 years of marriage. We'll have episodes releasing every week on Mondays. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Marriage Puzzle, or check out marriagepuzzle.com for blog posts and other fun links and things like that we keep up to date. And we look forward to you joining us next week, where together we'll work on marriage one puzzle piece at a time. See you later.
Have a good one.